Welcome to Fantasy Football Live, presented by Ram Trucks. Anybody that tells you the witching hour is the best hour in all of football obviously doesn't play enough fantasy football, because we know that the next hour is the true drama, the true chaos. Your day, your week, your month is going to be made or lost depending on what you do, and we are going to help you for every single second of it. We've got Tera Roberts, we've got Andy Behrens, and of course we have Dalton Del Don stepping in for Matt Harmon this week. We have got an all-star dream team ready to get you guys set for your rosters. You can get involved. All you got to do is give me the hashtag AskFFL. Our own Scott Pianowski is out right now on Twitter X answering questions, so you can get some answered there. Plus, we're going to answer questions throughout the course of this show. You can also hop into the YouTube chat because we're fancy like that. We got people monitoring it. We are ready to go. Speaking of which, we're going to get right to the chaos of the actives and inactives, because that's what you need to know at this very second. And the latest, greatest news, Justin Herbert is active with that high ankle sprain, but Jordan Love is inactive, meaning we all get that Malik Willis revenge game against the Titans we were apparently craving. Pittman Jr. active, Joe Mixon inactive at the running back position, but let's also give some love to the late games in the afternoon, and we've got some big news there. As Raheem Mostert doubtful, Kenneth Walker III doubtful. We know that George Kittle out, Evan Ingram out. So we've got a lot of chaos. Also, we have 2 Monday Night Football games this week. So there is chaos abound, and there are storylines everywhere. Let's go straight to them. Andy Behrens, the top fantasy storyline for week 3 is...
Oh, Fitz, that last graphic there told the story. There is a crisis at the tight end position right now, Fitz. That is my storyline. Is this the week that one of these guys actually does anything at all? Sam Laporta, Travis Kelce, and Mark Andrews cannot buy a target through 2 weeks. Kittle, Ingram, Njoku, and others are injured. The instant Yahoo gave tight end eligibility to Taysom Hill, the Saints phased him out of the offense, and the offense took off. As of this moment, tight ends have accounted for just 8 receiving touchdowns on the season, and nobody has more than 1. And it's guys like Foster Moreau, Darnell Washington, and Elijah Higgins who have done the scoring. This position is just actively undermining us, Fitz. It's probably temporary because passing offense is down everywhere. But if these guys don't turn it around this week, I am calling for the immediate abolishment of the position in fantasy.
Says the guy that loves kickers. Also, it should be noted, tight end's killing my fantasy leagues, but Brock Bowers is helping my actual football team. All right, Tera, give me your favorite storyline going into week 3.
For the record, this is not my favorite storyline, but I am pumped about the Malik Willis revenge game there in Tennessee. But the storyline that maybe that's a little Packers bias there coming through. But the storyline that I am excited for this week, it's the rookies, the breakout rookies that we had last week, particularly Marvin Harrison Jr. and Malik Neighbors, wondering if they're going to continue their dominance in tougher matchups here. With Marvin Harrison Jr., obviously week 1 got off to a very underwhelming start. Panic ensued, people looking for reasons, clocking his speed, trying to figure out if this is just going to be a bust situation in terms of where we were drafting him. Then week 2, he came around, showed everyone who was boss, had that massive performance here, and we're wondering if this is going to carry over and just be the norm for him. Was week 1 the blip, and is this the kind of action that we're looking to see from Marvin Harrison Jr. and Kyler Murray moving forward? And I feel very confident about it. We've also got Malik Neighbors, who had that little underwhelming week, that kind of Daniel Jones limiting your ceiling week in week 1, and then he finally came out in week 2 to an absolute boom performance. And when we say absolute boom performance, not just the receptions, but the target share was over 60%, massive. His target share was actually higher than his catch rate, which is insane, but it is Daniel Jones there. Despite the performance, though, they were playing Washington. So you kind of do wonder, okay, was this just a situation where we have Daniel Jones in a good matchup and a good situation to where he can get enough volume there to make Malik Neighbors? Or are we going to come back down to reality here in a more difficult matchup here this week? So I'm kind of keying in on this one, seeing if Malik Neighbors can key in and just kind of continue this trend here, or are we going to see more of this limited ceiling, kind of this Garrett Wilson type of situation with Zach Wilson previously?
Stick around too, because I've seen some of the questions we'll be posing later on, and there are still some Marvin Harrison Jr. doubters. I'll just say that. All right, Dalton Del Don, you get up to the plate. Come on in, brother. What do you got as your top fantasy storyline for week 3?
Will the league's passing stats pick up Teams are averaging just 192 passing yards per game, the lowest mark since 1992. 1.1 passing touchdowns are the fewest since 91. This despite weather and better quarterback health during the first 2 weeks of the year. Rookie QBs have simply looked overwhelmed. Bryce Young had a better first 2 games than Caleb Williams had, sorry to tell you, Andy. And then there's Patrick Mahomes, who has the lowest average depth of target in the league, despite adding Xavier Worthy. He just threw for his fewest yards in a healthy game of his career last week. We have Mel Kiper Jr. out here calling for too high safety coverage to be banned. There are 6 totals under 42 points this week. Just 5 teams have a positive pass rate over expectation this season. For many, many reasons, passing has been way down. Will it pick up in week 3?
Yeah, I love that, and I love that you threw a little shade to Andy Behrens. I'll give you the top storyline, and it's a team that, frankly, isn't having an issue throwing the football, and it's the Saints, who I've been particularly tough on most of our shows across Yahoo Fantasy and Yahoo Sports. But let's be honest, when you see what we've seen so far from Derek Carr, now all of a sudden you got to wonder. And here's the random thank you, Twitter X, for pointing this out to the entire world that most of us didn't know. If you look at Derek Carr's career, the 2 best years, 2016, 2020, what do they have in common with 2024? Election years. I don't know why, but Derek Carr seems to go off in an election year. There's something about total national chaos that seems to bring out the best in the quarterback. All we do know is that there's been a level of efficiency. Carr's moving around in the pocket better. He seems to have more comfort in this offense. I don't know exactly what's clicked, but we are looking at MVP caliber production so far from this Saints offense and from Derek Carr particularly. My question is, when does it come down to earth? Because inevitably, I think it will. The question is it now or later? But you got to give the Saints credit for what they did, especially to the Cowboys last week. All right, let's take a look at Lock It In. Lock It In is one of my favorites because you need to know this. It's a player with the tough matchup in week 3, and we don't care. We're still going to know that they deliver. We're going to give you a player that we are locking in no matter what. Tara, you get to go first, and I hope you are giving me good news here.
I'm giving you good news here. So this is actually my first time on a show with Dalton Del Don, and I felt like I was stealing from him. I know him a little bit, even though I haven't spoken to him, and my guy here is Anthony Richardson, coming off of that ugly QB21 performance where he completed just 50% of his passes and threw 3 interceptions, was outperformed by Malik Willis, the aforementioned Malik Willis here. So it was just a kind of not so friendly reminder that there is some volatility there. I feel like people are panicking here, and I've seen people saying they're just going to bench Anthony Richardson. They don't feel confident in him. Look, this is the type of volatility that you expect with a big play, deep threat quarterback. He's got the rushing upside, and he loves to chuck it downfield. There's going to be some games here where occasionally he's not going to put up to the level of production that we expect, but we're still locking it in. You need to roll him out this week. Again, this is a difficult matchup, but we have seen him succeed in a difficult matchup defensively against Houston in week 1, so don't count him out here. We're still locking it in with Anthony Richardson.
Yeah, and this is where I remind fantasy football fans, like, just listen to the NFL game commentators on this. Everybody knew Anthony Richardson needed reps. The one thing he needs right now is reps. The Colts are not going to sit him because they know he needs in-game. He got sat last year because of the injury. They're not going to sit him. All right, Dalton, it's your turn here. Give me a player that you are locking in.
All right, James Conner versus Detroit. The Lions allowed the fewest fantasy points per game against running backs last season and the second fewest so far this year. They're allowing just 3.3 yards per carry, and DJ Reader is back. This is definitely not a great matchup for Conner. But Arizona is top 5 in yards per play this season with a healthy Kyler Murray and, of course, the addition of Marvin Harrison Jr. Conner remains an injury risk, but he finished 3rd in rush yards over expectation last season, and he continues to play well this year. It's a good system in Arizona. The Cardinals led the league in yards per carry after Murray returned last year, and he's obviously healthier now. Conner has the 7th most red zone touches this year despite resting in week 2's blowout. Arizona has a healthy team point total this week. So I say Conner still delivers despite the bad matchup.
I just love the fact that you took me on a roller coaster there. You're like, it's bad, but it's good. It's bad, but it's good. I love that. The drama going on. Andy Behrens, give us somebody you're locking in.
First, Dalton attacks Caleb Williams, then Tera attacks the Bears defense. I'm just taking it on all sides here. I'm gonna go with Josh Jacobs in this one. He's facing a Tennessee run defense that has been plenty impressive, especially the interior of that line. They rank top 10 through 2 weeks, allowing fewer than 100 rushing yards per game. But Jacobs himself has been plenty impressive. He's looking a little bit more like the 2022 version of himself. He's gained 255 scrimmage yards in the first 2 games. He was just absolutely filthy last week while carrying 32 times for 151 yards. Brilliant game plan from Matt LaFleur and the Packers against the Colts last week. We have to assume that Green Bay gonna lean heavily on their featured runner again, given last week's success and the fact that Malik Willis will draw another start. The Jets' two-headed rushing committee just put 95 yards on the Titans a couple weeks ago, and I think you can expect a similar total from Jacobs today. He's right back near the top of the missed tackle leaderboard, by the way, where he always is throughout his career, and he's averaging 3.8 yards after contact per attempt. He's simply way too good for me to sit in this or any matchup.
You guys are way too good in the YouTube chat. Let's get a couple of questions in. The first one comes from Liam Hickey, who says, good morning, guys. Should I start Ridley or Smith and Jigba at flex this week? Tara, what do you think?
Smith and Jigba coming off that fantastic game, but I love the dominance that Calvin Ridley is showing in that offense. We know he's the wide receiver 1 there. Not the ideal matchup here, but I'm still leaning on Calvin Ridley.
Right, and Roger Vance comes in and says, Stafford, Herbert, or Andy Dalton? I mean, he said Dalton, so we should go to Dalton. Dalton, what do you think?
Oh, man. Give me Andy Dalton, actually, in this matchup. Herbert battling the high ankle sprain. Stafford losing all his weapons. This is obviously a reach, but I still believe in Canales. Maybe Deontay Johnson comes alive. Indoor matchup. So, Andy Dalton, I don't feel great about it.
I mean, do you see the shirt? Like, am I not sitting up tall enough? Like, you're bringing back. I mean, Dalton, I don't know. We're not going to throw to you next time. I mean, that's just the way I'm wearing a Raiders shirt, and you're giving me all this shit. All right, yeah, keep the questions coming. We'll keep them coming throughout the course of this. Let's get some thoughts here on make your pick. We're going to look at some tough flex decisions with multiple players submitted by you, amazing people. You guys are the ones that help make this go. And Dalton, we'll take a look at a couple of different here. So the first one that comes up on Make Your Pick is a start 3 PPR. Mason, Charbonnet, Etienne, Montgomery, or Moss. What do you think? Hashtag Ask FFL.
You got to go the first 3 here. Mason, Charbonnet, and Etienne. Mason's a butt. You could argue he's the top 3, if not the top fantasy back this week without Kittle, without Debo there. San Francisco and the Rams are missing so many weapons. You just like the game script for Mason there. And Charbonnet, he led all backs in snap share last week without Kenneth Walker. The game script's going to be fine there too with Skylar Thompson struggling in Miami. And then Etienne, Buffalo actually has struggled against the run there. So I'm going Etienne, Charbonnet, and Mason here.
Are you comfortable? You mentioned Mason doesn't have the other weapons around you. Does that make you more or less comfortable overall knowing that he has to shoulder more of the workload?
More in a matchup against the Rams where they, favored by a touchdown. Rams missing so many pieces. I'd like to see more targets from Mason. He doesn't quite have the actual upside of CMC, but man, a lead back in this Niners system, and Trent Williams is playing. That's key here too. So I just would rather actually prefer the touches. I mean, I think it's great. I mean, Debo is getting 5 to 8 carries. So if Mason, I'm not sure he can stand a whole season getting 25 to 30 touches a game, but man, he's just locked in as a top 3 back right now.
All right, let's get the next question from Mark coming in. Mark says, Singletary, Dobbins, or T. Higgins half PPR need to hashtag Ask FFL. What do you think, Dalton?
That's a tough call for sure. I'm leaning Dobbins and Higgins here. The Browns defense is so tough at home. The Giants just have a 16-point implied team total, the lowest in the league this week. Dobbins has a tough matchup too, but he's just been so good. Higgins is risky coming off the injury, but Washington has allowed by far the most fantasy points to wide receivers this year. So I'm benching Singletary here, Fitz.
All right, let's get the next one in. And this one comes from the FF Waterboy, which can only make me think it's a fantasy football Waterboy, which is kind of an awesome idea if we could have somebody sit next to the desk and just start spraying water at us midway through the show. PPR need to. Cam Akers, Jerome Ford, DeMarcus Robinson, Khalil Shakir. Hashtag Ask FFL. What do you think, Dalton?
Not layups here, but I'm going Akers and Robinson. Ford is a close call here, but his snap share dropped to 42% last week, so I'm leaning Robinson playing indoors and acting as LA's wide receiver 1 this week. They kept using 11 personnel even with the injuries last week. I like Jordan Whittington as a sleeper too, but give me DeMarcus Robinson. The Vikings are just a tough matchup for Akers, but he'll be Houston's lead back. And Minnesota linebacker Ivan Pace is out, so I'm going Akers and DeMarcus Robinson.
All right, Dalton and I get to head to the bench and get some of that water from FF Waterboy. In the meantime, Andy, Tara, why don't you give us some fantasy stock watch?
Yeah, we're going to tread into Yahoo Finance's turf this morning and engage in a little stock watch. We're going to look at players who are trending either up or down. I suppose we could also talk about players who aren't trending at all, but there's no fun in that. Tara, start us off. Whose stock are you tracking?
I'm going to start us off positive here. We're going to start with the trending up of Brandon Aiyuk, massively trending up this week after 2 underwhelming performances through the first 2 games. But now he absolutely has to step up. We have no Deebo Samuel. We have no George Kittle. The dynamic is going to change here, and the 49ers are going to have to lean on Brandon Aiyuk. And what makes this situation even more of a stock up is that it's against the Rams defense that is just really struggling as a whole. The Rams, again, last week allowed Marvin Harrison Jr. to absolutely torch their secondary, putting up 130 yards and 2 touchdowns by the end of the first quarter. He didn't even need to do anything after that. It was absolutely crazy. Aiyuk hasn't looked like himself, obviously, here, but this is the game where he's going to pull everything together. The stock is going to come up, and we're finally going to have this Brandon Aiyuk payday party here.
Oh, I love it. I need it. I'll keep it positive, and I'll mention Alvin Kamara. His stock is obviously sky high right now. He's coming off a 4-touchdown game against Dallas, leading the league with 290 scrimmage yards. Nobody has had the answer to the Saints offense so far. They force you to cover more of the field than any other team in the league. You might be thinking that Kamara is a sell high because he's operating at a level of efficiency that we haven't seen really since his rookie year. But here's the fact I want you to remember. Kamara right now leads the NFL in carries inside the 10-yard line, and he has 4 touchdowns inside of 12 yards. Meanwhile, Taysom Hill, who's not even going to play today, he doesn't yet have a red zone touch. So it seems like New Orleans may have just decided to simply give the ball to their best player when they get down to the goal line, which is huge news. That is a huge deal. It bodes well for Kamara's full season outlook. This is the path for him to maybe an RB1 overall finish. Okay, Tara, give us another player whose stock is trending either up or down. Are you going to keep it positive?
No, I'm going negative here. We're trending down. And you had me in such high spirits with the Alvin Kamara stock up right there, because I've got 2 dynasty teams with Alvin Kamara who are thriving purely based off of him. But now I've got one that is kind of tanking at this point, and I feel like it's not his fault. It's Michael Pittman Jr. He's there. He's the wide receiver 1. He is the target leader. But unfortunately here, and I talked positively about the turnaround for Anthony Richardson, I think one thing that we have to recognize is the fantasy upside of Anthony Richardson is not completely tied to that of Michael Pittman. So while I'm saying that Anthony Richardson could have a strong bounce back week, that necessarily doesn't have anything to do with Michael Pittman's stock here, unfortunately. It's tilting down. As we look at Anthony Richardson, one of the, if not the highest ADOT in the league, prefers throwing bombs to Alec Pierce here. And he's just kind of struggling with his intermediate game right here. As long as we have this stock going down, unfortunately for Michael Pittman, until Anthony Richardson figures out how to really attack the middle, that intermediate game, I think we're going to continue to see just a plummeting, unfortunately, of Michael Pittman's stock. It's tough to start him right now.
Yeah, that's a tough scene. We also get Josh Downs coming back to make it even more complicated. That's brutal. I'm gonna give anyone with Jamar Chase on a roster a little pep talk here, and I'll say that he is just a screaming buy low right now. He's coming off obviously a slow start to his season. Only been targeted 11 times. He's caught 10 of those. And honestly, his most impactful play was like a 15-yard personal foul penalty last week. But Joe Burrow is actually looking pretty good. And I think the return of T. Higgins is going to change the equation for everyone in that offense. Also, a matchup with Washington can fix whatever is troubling an offense. The Commanders have allowed 8.1 yards per attempt, 6 passing scores in 2 games. Chase, I think, is about to remind everyone why he was a consensus first-round fantasy pick. All right, that has been your market update for this morning. Let's kick it back to Fitz.
I love that. I feel like I'm ready to invest. Also, now let's turn to our fantasy game changers for this week, powered by Ram Trucks, where we're identifying some of the most impactful players in one of the top fantasy matchups on the schedule. We're going with Lions Cardinals with the highest total of the day at 51.5 because we like fun things. So there should be plenty of offense in this one. The Lions favored by 3. Again, 51.5 is the over under on this. So somebody at this point that you feel like is a fantasy game changer. Dalton, who you got?
Trey McBride. He isn't off to a huge fantasy start, although it helped him recovering that touchdown in the end zone last week. But he's running a bunch of routes, and he has a 29% target share. He led all tight ends in first downs per route run last year and simply dominated in college. So this is a star who's now in a good offense. McBride has recorded at least a 20% target share in 14 straight games since taking over as a full-time player last season. As I mentioned, the Lions are tough against the run, but they allowed the 7th most fantasy points to tight ends last year. This matchup should also be fast-paced. Even more targets could be available with Greg Dortch suffering a hamstring injury in practice. He is active, but he'll be playing through that. McBride is a game changer this week, and he's my top fantasy tight end moving forward, just ahead of Brock Bowers. I'll throw you a bone there, Fitz.
Oh, look, I'll take that. Whoa, I'll take that bone all day long. Andy Behrens, give us your, I just barked. I can't believe that. Give us your fantasy game changer.
Yeah, McBride actually had a sick catch last week on a beautiful ball from my guy, Kyler Murray. He's coming off a flawless game against the Rams, passed for 3 scores, delivered a perfect passer rating, and rushed for 59 yards. He has made up for lost time with Marvin Harrison Jr., who was also great in that game. Murray went 5 for 5 on deep throws last week, and all 3 of his touchdowns were on deep attempts. That was an element that was entirely absent the previous week against Buffalo. It was windy. We questioned whether we would really see that aspect to the offense, and then we saw it in a huge way. Now, Detroit's defense, obviously, much higher degree of difficulty than the Rams. So let's maybe not expect another perfect passer rating. I'll give you that. But Kyler looks as good as ever as a rusher. Plus, he has the most talented receiving core that he's probably ever worked with. We're not going to be benching him anytime soon. He's a candidate to finish in this or any week as the QB1 overall.
What are we doing here, Tara? Save the world here. Like, we are talking about a Cardinals-Lions matchup, and our first 2 fantasy game changers have both been Cardinals. Did I miss the part here where we're like, are we suddenly sleeping on the lines? We're normalizing the explosiveness of Detroit. Tara, give us some hope for the other side.
I got you, Fitz. It's Jameson Williams here. I have to talk about my boy, Jameson Williams. The insane week 1 performance, finishing as a top 5 receiver. And I know everyone was wondering, like, is this just a blip? Are we going to have repeated reliance on Jameson Williams? And then we came around in week 2. And this was a big win for me from what we saw in week 2. Amon-Ra St. Brown reasserted himself as the wide receiver 1, dominated in targets, and yet still we had a low-end wide receiver 2 performance from Jameson Williams. If that's the floor, I am more than happy and thrilled and willing to start him on a weekly basis here. This is a guy who you can plug into your lineup now. We feel the safety of him, unfortunately. Sorry, Andy, stepping up as the potential second look here above Sam Laporta. And if he does that, that's a nice solid floor for you. And then he's got that massive upside because he is Jameson Williams, one of the most talented receivers of his draft class. So yeah, it's Jameson Williams, who is absolutely a game changer for me.
I also love the way you couch that in letting everybody know, hey, Amon-Ra still got his, because we'll see what the injury situation is for Amon-Ra moving forward. But heard a lot of shows sitting here saying, well, Jameson's going to be the number 1 now. Now, if the Lions thought that Jameson Williams was going to usurp as the number 1 wide receiver, they wouldn't have given Amon-Ra that much money. Follow the money on this. So to see Amon-Ra still get his and Jameson get fed makes sense. All right, it is time to line them up. This is Dalton's first time we get to do this. It is the hurry up offense. You guys know what we do. We take some of your questions there. We're going to pop a 25-second play clock on, and we will see if our experts can get these questions answered no matter how slow I read them. The first one comes from Kristen, who says, Godwin and Shaheed starting, Amari Cooper or Brian Thomas Jr. for the flex spot. What do we do here? Andy, what do you think?
Oh, I love that. Godwin right now, the wide receiver 1 or wide receiver 2 overall, depending on your format. I'm going to go Amari Cooper here just purely for the matchup. If we can't get it done against the Giants, maybe it's not going to happen. All right, let's take the next one, kick it to Dalton. Here's the question. Trade. Oh, it's a trade. Travis Kelce for J.K. Dobbins. Who wins that trade, Dalton?
This totally depends on team needs. It's a fair swap, a true buy low, sell high trade. Man, it's hard to argue with how Dobbins has looked this year. I did not see it coming. Kelce be 35 years old soon. Give me Dobbins. I think he would go higher if a draft were held today in a vacuum, but super close.
Dalton just dominating time of possession here, flagrantly disregarding the rules. But I like the call.
Timer.
Okay, next one. Let's send it to Tera. This is from Ajax. Oh, I'm gonna have to filibuster here. Lost Pacheco and Debo this week. Who do I flex now in PPR? What a bunch of names. Quentin Johnston, Tyler Johnson, Rico Dowdle, or Juwan Jennings?
Quentin Johnson. There we go.
Oh man, you got it.
I'm back, people. I'm back, and I would like to remind you that this is proof it's not as easy to quarterback this like an idiot as you guys think it is it, Andy Behrens? Woo! All right, look at that. Quarterback's back in, the offense is back going. Ross says, ask FFL, Demont or T. Pollard in standard flex. Dalton, I don't know if you've gotten a question lately, so we're just going to throw it to you. What do you think?
Both top 20 backs. I lean Pollard this week. Love the setup facing Malik Willis. I'd love the game script. Tajay Spears is going to be playing through an ankle injury. He's not right. I have Pollard as a top 15 fantasy back this week.
Look at that. Done with efficiency. Gets it in. He's back in the huddle. That's veteran move right there. Whatever, says Yahoo Fantasy. Samaje Perine, Quentin Johnson, or Khalil Shakir as a flex in half PPR. They're the only healthy players I have left that are not hurt. I'm ready to open a hospital, Andy. What do you think you should do? Don't open a hospital. That feels like a big undertaking. Andy, what should you do?
Yeah, a lot of liability issues there too. How is it week 3? And these are the names, and this is the question. I would take a flyer on Samaje Perine here. He's not even my favorite back in Kansas City's backfield, but man, that's where the upside is.
All right, the next question comes in from Quentin. Quentin says, should I trade London if I have a need in running back with CMC on IR and having Collins, Rice, Smith, Metcalf? What else can I do, Tera?
You absolutely can trade him. Looking at those wide receivers, you have arguably on a weekly basis guys that are pushing for top 12. I don't think you'll ever be in a situation where you'll have to start London outside of 5 weeks. So absolutely trade him for a running back with upside. Feel confident in it.
All right, let's get the next one up here. And this one comes from Philip. I'm going to try and say that name because it looks fancy. Philip Lavoisier says, half PPR, Madison, Spears, or Bucky. What do you think, Andy?
Yeah, I'm gonna lean Madison here for the matchup. Carolina's defense has just been about as generous as it gets in the NFL. I think Zamir White and Alexander Madison can both have decent days here, both find the end zone.
All right, Dalton, that means you get the last one of this 2-minute drill. And the last one comes from Colin, who says, I'm not going to try and say it, Juwan Jennings or Tank Bigsby. Pick one. Thanks. Here's Juwan Jennings or Tank Bigsby. What do you think, Dalton?
Yeah, of course, you give me this one too, but close. Give me Yossi Vosh. The 49ers may not have to pass a ton. I do like Bigsby, and he should be stashed in all fantasy leagues, but he's a bit banged up today, playing through a shoulder injury and concussed last week. Meanwhile, Washington has allowed the most fantasy points to wide receivers, so I'm going Yossi Vosh, even with T. Higgins back.
Yossi Vosh is the NFL equivalent of Nico Iamaleava in college football. No matter how many times I say it, I still get it wrong every time. I've been playing the video game, still get it wrong. All right. They never get it wrong on Football 301, one of my favorite shows that we have out on Yahoo Sports. Check it out. It's a smart breakdown every single week of some of the tape that you need to know. And Matt Harmon and Sal Vetri from the Yahoo Fantasy Forecast, they were deciding if Chris Godwin will stay hot or not. They had an interesting conversation about Chris Godwin. Check out some of it right here.
Part of me also thinks he kind of had a good season last year, Sal. He certainly looks more explosive this year. I'll give everybody that. But also he's catching touchdowns, whereas last year he caught over 80 passes over 1,000 yards. He just didn't catch any touchdowns. He might end up having the same catch yardage season as he did last year. He's just getting in the end zone this year.
Yeah, already matched his touchdown total from last season, so that's great. And yeah, I think part of this is all just the overall environment on offense looks good right now. It wasn't just a fluke, it seems like, in week 1. So that's going to help. You get the slot usage, and that's something that should be a mismatch problem like you're talking about. But the overall offense just looks better. It's not like we're going 3 and out here. We're actually having sustainable drives. So we're getting those red zone targets for Chris Godwin. Some explosive plays just help even more. And this upcoming week in week 3, he gets the Denver Broncos. He'll get to most likely avoid Patrick Surtain by going into the slot for 2/3 of the game.
Good call.
So another nice spot for Godwin. If you're talking about prop markets, maybe a spot to favor him over a Mike Evans.
All right, let's take a look at some fantasy chatter. some of the most talked about players in the newly redesigned Yahoo Fantasy app. Alvin Kamara getting plenty of conversation. Made a bet that this dude would be better than Rachaad White this season after preaching it all summer. Glad to say it looks pretty good. Nicholas, never count your money when you're sitting at the table. I'm just saying. And then we get this. Marvin Harrison Jr. has boom or bust vibes. Nice numbers last game, but still on 5 targets. Derek, who hurt you, man? And then Carson Steele, maybe the best name that's in all of football, says this guy's going to get the bulk of the carries. And then P. Ryan ninjas the touchdowns. That's according to Jesse. Marvin Harrison Jr. being some sort of a weird boom or bust prospect. We buying or selling that, Andy?
I'm not buying that at all. Marvin Harrison Jr. was one of the best receiving prospects that we've seen in a long time. He finally got going last week. They just didn't really need to keep the pedal to the metal against the Rams, right? That may be the case this week against Detroit. I wouldn't fade him at all. I think he's a spectacular player, could run any route. He's got size, he's got hands, he's got pretty much everything we look for. Last week it was everything I needed to see from Kyler and Marvin.
Yeah, I just feel like there's that one guy that's sitting in the back room and like, yeah, but it was only on 5 targets. Like, oh my God. If you watch that and think that there's a problem with Marvin Harrison, man, you go find a hug. All right, guys, let's get into a conversation about one of the other big matchups that we're going to have this weekend. Obviously, all eyes on Chiefs at Falcons. That's one of our biggest games for everybody in the fantasy lineup. Sunday Night Football. The Chiefs favored by 3. The over-under on this, 46.5, a little lower than I thought it would be. I thought it'd be a little heavier than that. So as we take a look at some of the biggest storylines here, Andy, what stands out to you as the top storyline?
Yeah, you saw the people talking about Carson Steele. Isaiah Pacheco is going to be out for an extended period, which may or may not wreck all of my teams. We'll see about that. I'll probably be okay if Steele actually emerges as a big piece of the replacement plan for Pacheco. We're going to get our first look at this backfield without Isaiah. The guess here is that Steele is actually the primary option to run the ball, certainly at the goal line. He is a 230-pound bruiser who was a preseason revelation. He's just a bumper car of a runner. Samaje Perine makes a little bit of sense in 2-minute situations and in obvious passing situations. But man, the Chiefs clearly like what they have in Steele. He was involved when Pacheco was in the mix. I'm not going to rule out the possibility that Kareem Hunt may have been, injured last year, and that explained the performance. He might be a thing in future weeks. But for now, Steele is definitely the guy I want. Of course, we might also just see Patrick Mahomes go supernova in the weeks ahead, which would also be fine with me.
Yeah, for some reason, I just feel like that's going to happen just because I don't get nice things. Dalton, give us the storyline that you like out of this game.
Yeah, can Travis Kelce bounce back? Kelce has already matched his number of games with fewer than 70 fantasy points than he had all of last season. He caught fewer than 3 passes last week for the first time since Patrick Mahomes' second career start. Rashee Rice has clearly emerged as Kansas City's top pass catcher. Kelce turns 35 years old next month, so fantasy managers are clearly panicking. But on the positive side, Kelce had a 41-yard catch called back by penalty last week. He was tackled at the 1-yard line. He is coming off a couple of tougher matchups. Marquise Brown is out for the season. Isaiah Pacheco might be too. And we all love Xavier Worthy. He's a big play threat, but he is not commanding targets as a rookie. Thanks in large part to a huge left tackle problem, Mahomes sports the lowest ADOT in the league. So I think Kelce's going to be busy Sunday tonight against a pass funnel Atlanta defense. There's clear concern given his age. I get it. But I still rank Kelce as a top 3 fantasy tight end this week, especially, given what the position is doing throughout the rest of the league this year.
I think from a fantasy standpoint, one of the biggest stories of tonight is all about the Falcons and our expectations. They're skewed by one drive. Let's remember that going into that last drive, the Falcons offense hadn't looked particularly great. And we keep talking about the passing game. Well, it came alive for one drive, right? A 2-minute drive, which quarterbacks will tell you is the easiest thing when you move from team A to team B to execute. We're having the wrong conversation because the Falcons are going to live and die by Bijan, right? And so there is some moment here where the Chiefs know what they have to stop. They have to stop this man from going off, because right now, I don't care if they're under center, if they're in shotgun, all of the things we're overanalyzing. The path to victory for the Falcons is not going to be based on putting everything on the shoulders of Kirk Cousins. It's going to be putting everything on the shoulders of Bijan. It's why I think he's going to have a huge game. It's why I think he has to have a huge season. And if the Falcons are going to live up to expectations, as much as we love to obsess over passing numbers and Drake London and Kyle Pitts and all of these things, it's not about them. It's about Bijan. And so Bijan needs to go off for the Falcons to have the game that they want to have and win this game. Tara, what stands out to you?
I'm going to go the opposite end of what Dalton was talking about, but I'm not going to be as positive. Can we trust Kyle Pitts? Unfortunately, Kyle Pitts just coming off of a week where everyone technically thrived, but Kyle Pitts. Cousins looked very competent. Drake London finally produced, even though it was on low volume. He finally put up numbers that were actually fine and usable for us. Darnell Mooney looked good as well. Bijan had a solid day. We even have the continued involvement of Ray McCloud. And poor Kyle Pitts has just been left out in the cold there. Week 1, 3 receptions on 3 targets for 26 yards and the touchdown that saved his day. Week 2, 3 receptions on 4 targets, 20 yards. This seems like a repeated pattern here, and I just don't feel extremely confident about it. And it kind of looks a little bit similar to some of the volume that we saw for him last year. Occasionally, we would get those games where he'd see an uptick in, targets in terms of 8 or 9 at a time, but for the most part, he was in that 4 to 5 range and just generally didn't have a ton of upside. And you have to wonder, even with the offensive change, are we just going to see the continuation of Kyle Pitts having these mediocre performances? In a tight end landscape, we're still starting him because we don't have a ton of options. But the positive outlook for him turning things around, we're crossing our fingers, but it just doesn't look like it has a whole lot of upside there.
All right, let's get a question in here from YouTube that sort of ties into this game because obviously Carson Steele was just part of our conversation. Bella Cam asks, should I start Carson Steele or Derek Henry? Dalton, what do you think?
We're going Derek Henry here against the Cowboys. It actually could be a big game from Derek Henry this week. No, I have Henry Steele as a top 10 back this week. I do like Steele among the Chiefs running backs replacements. He'll get some goal line work, but no-brainer, Derek Henry.
Is it a no-brainer? Everybody agrees, no-brainer? Like, you guys laughed. But I'm just saying, like, the Ravens completely abandoned the run in the fourth quarter, and we haven't seen enough production from Derek Henry. I'm just at least playing devil's advocate, Andy.
Well, I will say, like, touchdowns in back-to-back games, it is a relatively friendly matchup. I mean, we saw what Alvin Kamara just did. Not that Derek Henry would do it in the same way against Dallas, but friendly matchup for him. And, like, the Chiefs' backfield, as much as I'm willing it to be Carson Steele, it's still kind of a mystery box, right? Like, this could tilt toward Samaje Perine just as easily. It could be a 50-50 split. I'm just trying to imagine a scenario where Carson Steele is getting carries inside the 5-yard line, whereas I know Derek Henry has that role for Baltimore.
All right, we'll keep your questions coming from the YouTube chat, plus we'll get more of your questions in from social media later in the show, but it is time for Primetime Picks. Primetime Picks, where we go through 3 different games. In those 3 different games, we get to pick a skill position from each of those games. If you look at the standings, the standings are sort of what we thought they'd be right there. So Tara gets the win. Tara comes off the schneid. This is a big moment for Tara. Matt won week 1. So at this point, you look at last week, big week for Tara. So now Matt and Tara each have a win. Andy Behrens and I waiting to get it done. And last week was, just not good for me. That's 2 straight weeks where I'm just getting my butt flat out kicked. So Dalton will have the responsibility here of filling in for Matt. That's a big deal. This is a snake draft. We go in the opposite order of our finish, which means for the first time this season, I pick first. Our games that are up for pick are, we have 2 Monday night games, as we mentioned, and a Sunday night game. So in case you don't know, we have Chiefs and Falcons. We have Jacksonville, Buffalo. We have Washington, Cincinnati. And as much as I'd love to pretend that I'm going to have some strategery to this, I am not. I have the first pick, and I'm simply going to take Bijan. Like, of all the teams, all the players, I think it's clear that Bijan is the most reliable fantasy player that I have available to my disposal. So with the first pick in the draft, I will not get cute trying to figure out who's going to be left for me by the time we snake back to me. I am just going to walk up and say, I'm taking Bijan, and I'm hoping to God that the fantasy football gods stop wanting all over me. Andy Behrens, who's next?
Fitz, you were bound to have a championship hangover in primetime picks after last year.
I'm
this
still
is
the
as deep as
defending
we've
champion.
ever gone into a show without you mentioning that you won it last year. So I'll just say that on your behalf. I'm looking at that Baltimore-Jacksonville game, and there's literally only one player that I'm interested in. So I'm going to go ahead and take James Cook. He just delivered a 3-touchdown game, and his team is pretty clearly committed to running early, running often, and making it look exactly like it did in the second half last year. I also don't think that Jacksonville is capable of forcing Buffalo to pass. Cook is really the only flex that I fully trust in this one.
Yeah, that's a good pick by you. And that brings Tera up next because the standings is not based on who won last week. It is based on the overall standings because of the tiebreaker in points. That means that Tera picks third. Tera, what do you got?
Not gonna lie here, Andy sniped me there. I would have taken James Cook, but that's okay. It's all right. We've got this winter blood coming through our veins right now. I'm going with Ja'Marr Chase for this massive bounce back week here. Yes, we've got T. Higgins coming back. I never trust T. Higgins coming off of an injury. I just don't. Ja'Marr Chase has had, unfortunately, underwhelming performances to start off the season, but this is literally the perfect get-right game for him. We saw it last week in terms of this Washington defense getting lit up. I expect Ja'Marr Chase to have a massive bounce-back performance here and carry me to victory here.
That means that, Dalton, you get 2 straight picks for Matt at this point. And remember, you're picking for Matt, which means the entire time you have to whine about how the game's rigged and it's not really there for you and, like, it's not your fault. Like, you got to give everybody excuses why it's not going to work. So if you just letting you know what the expectation is, Dalton, you get 2 straight picks. So you take him first.
I wanted to destroy Harmon's picks, but his aren't so terrible, actually. First, he'll take Rashee Rice. Rice will avoid A.J. Terrell in the slot for about half a snap Sunday night in a game indoors. Pass funnel Atlanta defense. No Marquise Brown. No Pacheco. Worthy has a 15.9% target rate as a rookie, so Rice is set up for a nice game there. Harmon's next pick is Travis Etienne. It seems like a good pick to me with James Cook gone in a game that's otherwise is going to spread out its fantasy points. The Bills have allowed the 3rd most fantasy points to running backs this year. Tank Bigsby's banged up. So another not so horrible pick for Harmon here, Etienne and Rice.
I like 2 not so horrible picks. That feels about right. Tera, you're back up already. What do you got for us?
I feel like the pickings are getting a little slim here, unfortunately. So I am going, these primetime games. I'm going to go over to Jacksonville, and I'm going to select Brian Thomas. It is a risk. The very potential for this to be a bust week for him, but I'm leaning into the hopeful upside that Jacksonville is going to have to push a little bit of volume here. Thomas has had 8 total targets over the first 2 weeks, 4 in each game. It's not a ton, right? Everything's being spread pretty evenly around this Jacksonville offense. But in terms of how he actually visually looks on the field, he's operating as the alpha. He is getting the big plays down the field. So it doesn't take a lot for him to go off from a fantasy perspective. So maybe this is finally the game where we see just a minor uptick in targets here, plus a big touchdown and nice solid performance from Brian Thomas.
All right, that feels good. You've been high on Brian Thomas throughout the course of this year. So that makes a lot of sense. Andy Behrens, what do you got for us next?
Yeah, after Ja'Marr Chase was off the board, I don't much care what I get in the Washington-Cincinnati game. So I'm just going to go ahead and take Travis Kelce. And am I panicked about tight ends generally right now? Yes. Has Kelce been a huge part of the problem? Oh, yeah. But he's also had some near misses. Dalton mentioned it. I don't think he's playing poorly, and a big game has to be coming soon. This is a pass funnel defense, as Dalton said. He's just too essential to what the Chiefs do on offense to stay quiet. I want Kelce here. He's probably, of everybody left on the board, he's the guy with the best shot at a multi-touchdown game.
I now have 2 straight picks, and I don't feel good about either of them. I'm going to be honest with you. I feel like I'm sitting here saying, how did I end up in this situation? But here's the thing. The definition of insanity, they always say, is doing the same thing and expecting a different result. I'm going to go insane here, and I'm just going to take Dalton Kincaid. Like, there has to be at some point, like, we can't be this wrong all year about Dalton Kincaid. At some point, there's got to be a Dalton Kincaid game. Now, maybe the target share is what it is at this point, and Josh Allen is going to throw to 3,742 different people this season. That might be the way this thing goes, but I got nothing. There is nothing left in these games that I feel solid about, so I'll at least roll the dice towards Dalton Kincaid. And then I get to go back to the drawing board, and at this point, I'm just like, this is playing darts. I'm just throwing something against the wall to see what sticks. We all know what I'm throwing against that wall. Spaghetti, I guess we'll go with that. I'll go with Brian Robinson. Look, I don't trust necessarily this Bengals run defense in general. I think this run defense is undisciplined, doesn't take great fits a lot of time. It will give running backs opportunities. So I'm just going to hope and pray that this is one of those games where it feels like the fundamentals aren't really locked in for the Bengals, and as a result, Washington can run the football. That's truly my only logic on this, because there doesn't feel like there's a lot there for me. It gets back to you now, Andy, and I'm sure you'll have a brilliant pick that will score you tons of points, because you're just better at this than I am right now.
Now, it was a coin flip for me between Brian Robinson and Zach Moss. That's who I'm taking. He's the clear featured back for the Bengals. He's playing 73% of the snaps on the season. Has 3 times as many carries this year as Chase Brown. So that situation has kind of settled itself. I'm a longtime Zach Moss guy, so he's easy for me to root for. His team is also favored by more than a touchdown here. So this is a great scenario for any running back. Give me Moss.
All right, that feels good too. Tera, that means you're back to the board, and the only game left for you would be Sunday Night Football. So what are you taking there?
Okay. We're going to Atlanta, and I'm building a My Guys roster here, and I'm taking Drake London, coming off the strong performance. 6 receptions, 7 targets, 54 yards, not so fantastic, but he got the touchdown here. Nice little bounce back week there. Expect the continuation of his performance this week with Kirk Cousins stepping up. So of the guys that are left on the board, I know it doesn't feel super inspirational, but once Bijan is gone, we're turning to Drake London here. Kirk Cousins, don't let me down.
All right, so that means Matt Dalton Del Don Harmon is up next. So what do you think, Dalton? What do you got for Matt?
T. Higgins for Harmon. Washington has allowed easily the most fantasy points to wide receivers this year. They've also allowed the league's highest passer rating against. The Commanders also have been sneaky good on offense, so I think they can keep this game competitive. So Higgins looks like a steal here now that he looks good to go for Monday night.
All right, we'll keep you guys updated on how the standings go, especially if I win. Otherwise, this segment might just be dropped soon. This is getting turned into a bloody massacre at this point. In the meantime, let's get Andy and Dalton to get some fantasy face-off with the top pickup of the week, former Raiders legend and icon Derek Carr.
Yeah, fantasy face-off time. We're putting Dalton Del Don in the hot seat. This, of course, is where we like to take one of the buzziest players in fantasy and throw their name into some sit-start decisions for the people. We are 2 weeks into the season, Dalton, and no one can hold the Saints offense below 40 points. Derek Carr has accounted for 6 touchdowns. He's the QB2 overall. He leads the league in passer rating, YPA, touchdown passes. I suppose he has to regress at some point, but maybe not this week at home against the Eagles. Carr was also, of course, one of the most added players in fantasy this week. So let's see him. Let's see who we're starting him over and where we're benching him. We'll start with Dak Prescott, the guy that he just beat. Dak is facing Baltimore this week. What do you got?
Yeah, as you said, Carr is the number 2 fantasy quarterback this season. This despite New Orleans attempting the fewest passes in the league. Just crazy. I wasn't high on the Saints entering the year, but I'm willing to change my view on them big time here. All this motion is just a game changer. Super close with Dak. I have them ranked back-to-back, both in my top 10 this week, with Dak 1 spot higher. Prescott is at home facing a pass funnel Ravens defense. Dallas will not be able to run the ball in this game. He's so much better at home. It should be fast-paced. Meanwhile, Carr's opponent, the Eagles, have struggled against the run, allowing an NFL high 6.8 yards per carry. That spread is flipped in part because A.J. Brown is out. So it's possible this is another big Alvin Kamara game. So that leans me just ever so slightly to Dak.
Yeah, I like the Dak Prescott home factor. That's an issue that I hadn't necessarily considered. Okay, how about Geno Smith? He has been dealing so far. He's at home this week against Miami, and Miami was just absolutely embarrassed by Buffalo a week ago. Really a non-competitive game. Who do you like here?
Derek Carr for me here. I love what Seattle's doing with the new OC Ryan Grubb, and Geno Smith's good. But I worry the Seahawks just won't have the passing volume facing Skylar Thompson. That matchup is a lowly 41-point total, whereas the Eagles Saints could easily turn into a high-scoring game. Geno is underrated real-life quarterback, but give me Carr playing indoors this week. Clint Kubiak's extreme use of motion and play action just looks like a cheat code, masking any offensive line problems, while helping New Orleans score 91 points over the first 2 weeks and resting their starters in the fourth quarters. It's just been amazing.
It's crazy that it's week 3 and we're looking at a sit-start question with Derek Carr and Geno Smith, and we're feeling pretty good on both sides, honestly. Okay, last one, and this one I just threw in here to be cruel. Derek Carr or Brock Purdy, your guy, a quarterback with a great matchup, but pretty much 0 healthy teammates right now.
Give me Carr again. My guy Purdy will likely be missing CMC, Debo, and George Kittle. Some of his huge split, not likely, they're all going to be out. But I will note that some of Purdy's huge splits without Debo are a bit misleading because they also came without Trent Williams. And as you mentioned, Andy, the Rams are a terrific matchup here. but I worry about the setup given all the Rams injuries. I just don't see a lot of pushback. I see too much running from the Niners. Fire up Brandon Aiyuk in fantasy lineups, but this game's going to feature a lot of Jordan Mason. Meanwhile, Derek Carr leads the NFL in fantasy points per dropback by a mile, so I'm starting him over my guy Purdy this week.
Yeah, I agree with all that. Love that stuff, Dalton. Good stuff from you. Let's send it back now to Fitz and Tera.
All right, it's time to do some. I'm not good at making actual flyers, but fantasy flyers, I think we'd be really good at. So, Tera, give me somebody that you're taking a flyer on this weekend.
I am taking a flyer on Zach Moss this weekend. I'm surprised we didn't talk about him before this because this matchup here bodes very well for him. The Bengals backfield obviously has been, it's been disappointing. Zach Moss is operating as the clear RB1. He's got the edge in touches over Chase Brown, 24-10, but it's not really amounting much for him. Week 1, his day was salvaged by the touchdown. Otherwise, a very underwhelming fantasy performance of just 9 carries for 44 yards, a couple of receptions. Week 2, same situations, just low yardage, touches, just not enough to really carry him over the edge for a grand total of 5.2 fantasy points here. But here's the thing, he is the RB1 here, and the best cure for a very underwhelming stretch of production for an RB1 is a dream matchup against the Washington Commanders here. And this is an excellent setup for Zach Moss to sneak into that low-end RB1 territory. Washington just gave up a big game to Devin Singletary of all people, and it wasn't just in terms of volume. He averaged almost 6 yards per carry, got the touchdown as well. So I feel like this is the situation where we're finally going to see Zach Moss step up and pay off in his lead role. This is the game here for him. I know it might feel a little bit uncomfortable, but I'm leaning into it if you got to take a flyer.
Let me give you another name and see, because a lot of people talking Juwan Jennings. You willing to take a flyer on Juwan Jennings?
I am, yeah. And honestly, I was willing to take a flyer on Juwan Jennings prior to George Kittle being ruled out, but prior to him even being questionable, really. Because when we look at this 49ers offense, I talked about Brandon Aiyuk earlier in this show, stepping up and being the guy that they lean on. But there's only so much volume he can handle. They're going to have to lean on somebody else. Obviously, Brandon Aiyuk and Jordan Mason on the ground are going to be those two guys, but there has to be another pass catcher that contributes. And Juwan Jennings is a guy that they recently paid, a guy that they trust, a guy that they like. Never really been a high volume guy, but he can handle it on occasion. We've seen it happen here. So this is a situation where he can step up, see a few extra targets, have some touchdown equity here in a matchup where he can absolutely take advantage of that trust that he has and the connection with Brock Purdy and step up and be a nice, deeper flyer here for fantasy managers that are struggling.
All right, let's bring the entire offense back together. We're going to huddle up because it is time for our hurry-up offense. As we come to a close with the show, we get as many questions in as possible, and we start with Cade saying, do I start Shaheed over Diggs, Chase or Aiyuk? Diggs and Chase are starters. Aiyuk is in my flex. Hashtag AskFFL. Andy Behrens, what do you think?
I think we actually do start Shaheed here. I'm gonna play him over Diggs. I love the opportunity for both Chase and Aiyuk to erupt in this one, and to I know they've disappointed you early in the season. It's not going to be that way this week. I love Shaheed. I love the way they're using him.
You just don't hear the whistle, or you just don't? Okay, fine. Dalton, let's follow the rules here. Zach Moss or Aaron Jones? Big thanks in advance. See how polite Derek was with that? What do you think, Dalton?
I'll say Moss if it's half PPR, Jones if it's full PPR. Jones has looked rejuvenated in Minnesota, but Moss is a terrific matchup at home versus Washington Monday night. So to me, this one just comes down to scoring format. I know it's boring, but it's a cop out there. But Jones, if you get the PPR, Moss, if you get the half PPR, he's more likely to score.
We're just willy-nilly with the whistle around here. Rice, baby. Ding, 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 ding. Says BTJ versus Buffalo, Robinson versus Cleveland, Tolbert versus Baltimore. Who gets the second flex spot? Ugly, right? Tera, what do you think?
Oh, we got to go with Brian Thomas Jr. here. Just talked about him. He's more reliable. Obviously, there's some volume that Wan'Dale Robinson can see, but in terms of the guy who I think will get the touchdown and have the stable floor there, Brian Thomas Jr. for the win.
See how she did that? Before the whistle. All right, we're going to snake this. This one is going to come back. We'll go over to Dalton. As Dalton says, man versus life. Carr or Anthony Richardson? Look at this. I'm going to give you all time to answer.
Oh, that's tough. Both are top 10 QBs for me. I lean my guy Richardson here. The Bears defense is no doubt legit, but Richardson just throws deep a ton and has all that rushing upside. I know it's a lot incomplete, but it's just a fantasy dream, throwing deep and running like Richardson. Still, I would not fault you for preferring Carr this week. I'm buying the Saints start.
All right, I'm buying it. The whistle just doesn't even matter anymore. All right, Andy Behrens, start one, PPR, Brian Robinson or J.K. Dobbins from T-Bone. What do you got?
Oh, it's close. I have him really close in the ranks. I got to go Dobbins here, which is a weird thing to say, and I would not have believed it a month ago. But Dobbins has looked really good, obviously, and he's not. It's not like we're not going to see Gus Edwards. It's not like the matchup is perfect either against Pittsburgh. Could be a low-scoring game, but Dobbins has looked excellent, and he's catching a handful of passes.
Let's get some YouTube questions coming in as we get the question from Black Guy 710. Full option, flex option, full PPR. Judy or Watson? What do you think, Tara? Judy or Watson?
Oh my gosh. It feels weird to say Judy. I would have not said Judy heading into the season, but again, we got Malik Willis, and while they can win the game with Malik Willis, that's not a good situation for Watson, Christian Watson, unfortunately. So we're going Jerry Judy on that one.
All right, let's get another one in from YouTube, and I'll send this one. We'll send this one to Dalton. Some dude, Nate, says Mike Evans or Jameson Williams. Mike Evans or Jameson Williams?
I'm buying Williams' start. His first three targets are legit, but no, you got to go Mike Evans here, just a touchdown machine. I know it's tricky for Surtain and maybe a better matchup for Godwin, but no, I'm sticking with Mike Evans. He's a locked and loaded top 15 wide receiver for me. Close call though. I agree, it's close.
See, consider that your commercial timeout. We didn't have the clock for those. We are back to the pace. Villain 502. Choose two, half PPR. Jalen Waddle, Javonte Williams, Amari Cooper, Xavier Worthy, McLaurin, and D. Robinson available as well. I don't know how people in game shows read these questions this quickly. Andy Behrens, what do you got for? I gave you as many names as possible.
Wow, McLaurin available is kind of wild. I know it's been a quiet couple weeks, but he's a great player. I'd look to drop someone for him. I wouldn't necessarily play him this week. Give me Amari Cooper here again against the Giants. Give me Waddle.
All right, next we got MBI saying half PPR flex, Waddle, Thomas Jr., Deontay Johnson, Jake Ferguson. Tara, what do you think?
I know everyone thinks I'm going to say Brian Thomas here, but it's Waddle still that I would play over Brian Thomas. I know quarterback situation is not ideal. Obviously, it tends to favor Tyreek Hill being the one that gets the volume there, but Jalen Waddle is still very talented. Second option in this offense. We're leaning on Jalen Waddle.
All right, we'll get this next one in from I Bleed Husker Red by starting and saying I'm sorry for the game and the way it turned out on Friday. That was not perfect. I can only start three, half PPR. Nico Collins, Rashee Rice, Shaheed, St. Brown. Ask FFL. Dalton, what do you think?
As much as I love Shaheed and I have him as a borderline top 20 guy this week, you're benching him. Collins, Rice, St. Brown, all borderline top 10 guys. Just so rock solid. So love Shaheed, but he's on my bench this week.
All right, next one for Andy Behrens. We got Demand FF staying. Half point PPR. Why the 0.5, dude? Like the half just seems easier to type. Lockett or Keon Coleman with the hashtag AskFFL.
Yeah, I like Keon Coleman, but again, I don't know that we can trust Buffalo to throw. I don't know that they're going to have to. Josh Allen is averaging 21 pass attempts a game. I'm going to go Tyler Lockett here. I know he was quiet last week, but he wasn't quiet when they needed him most late in that game and in overtime.
All right, we'll get look with time to spare. We got a second back on the clock. Mark E says Higgins, Dell, or Cooper. I don't know if I trust that Higgins will play without restrictions. Tara, fair concern with Higgins. What do you think?
100%. I cannot ever play T. Higgins coming off of an injury. We never know just how limited he'll be. We've seen him come out there, run a couple routes, and then be done for the day. Can't do it. I lean towards going with the upside of Amari Cooper. Cooper and Dell, kind of similar situations right now.
Mary Lee Taylor comes up next with the hashtag AskFFL. Dak Prescott or Baker Mayfield? Andy, what do you think?
I'm going to go Dak Prescott here. And I know, like, you're looking at that Ravens matchup, you think it's difficult. The Ravens are allowing 10 more points per game than they did last year. That whole coaching staff is scattered around the league. They're missing pieces. It's not the same defense. We don't need to fear them to the same extent that we did last year. So give me Dak.
All right, so we'll get the next one up from Ben. We've already answered half of his question. So Carl Richardson, we already answered that. But he does say, PPR need one running back. Connor, the matchup, Montgomery or Charbonnet. What do you think, Dalton?
Super close for me. I have Charbonnet and Connor very close. But as I mentioned earlier, I'm sticking. Oh man, those are really close. I actually have them back to back, Fitz. I could see this either way. Lions have allowed the fewest fantasy points last year to running back, second fewest last year. Charbonnet. I'm going to lean Charbonnet in that matchup. I just think it's going to be a more favorable game script with Skylar Thompson on the other end. That was a tough one.
Dalton's just coming in willy-nilly. Like, the clock does not matter to Dalton. He is just dropping the mic. William comes in and says, FFL shows the best. I mean, we're going to get you questioned when you compliment the show. One question, PPR, Khalil Shakir, Brian Thomas Jr. What do you think, Tara?
It's me with the Brian Thomas Jr. questions. I got you on the time limit here, Fitz. Don't worry about it. But I am saying Brian Thomas Jr. one more time over here. Andy was 100% right about the Keon Coleman Buffalo Bills receiver situation. We can't trust them.
All right, Mojo, spelled interesting, says Judy or Mooney for wide receiver this week, standard league. All right, what do you think, Andy?
Oh gosh, I'm gonna go Mooney here. Actually, I just can't do it with Jerry Jeudy. I can't trust a secondary receiver in that offense. I really like the way Mooney looked last week, and it's a matchup in which, of course, they're gonna have to throw all day.
Look at that. Brilliantly done with 4 seconds left on the clock. Dalton Del Don also brilliantly done stepping in for Matt Harmon. We send Harmon all of our love, obviously. Really appreciate Dalton coming in and sitting in for him on the show. On behalf of Tara, on behalf of Andy, I'm Jason. Jason, I just called myself Jason. No one's ever called me Jason. I'm Fitz. I don't know what I was doing right there. It takes a huge cast behind the scenes to make this show happen. We really appreciate all of their hard works, particularly. We appreciate you guys for taking the time. We're back Thursday. Don't forget, 30 minutes before Thursday Night Football, we're back 7:30 p.m. Eastern every Thursday, and you can catch us here every Sunday from noon to 1. Enjoy the games. Thanks for watching Fantasy Football Live, presented by Ram Trucks.